right. Whew. Here we go. Not 2 o'clock, just 1 o'clock. Let me tell you what. At 1 a.m., Red Bull is your friend. I'm telling you, man, I should be sponsored by Red Bull. They have all these like Red Bull athletes to get sponsored for doing all this stuff. They ought to have Red Bull dads that get sponsored because they got to stay up all night with babies. You know what I mean? And the only way they can get through is coffee and Red Bull. We're ready. Ready. You know what? I was thinking about bringing my daughter up here and just doing the class with her since I'm going to probably bring her up on one of these next couple videos if I can shoot one that's not too late at night. Just because, she's had the problems and everybody on my channel's been praying for her and so it'd be nice for y'all to be able to meet her. She's a sweet, sweet, sweet lady. Actually, let's see here. See if I can do this. Because I have, you know what? That stinks. Let's see here. Just bear with me 1 second. Let's see if I can get this to work. If you can see that, I don't think it'll zoom. Is it? It won't zoom in, will it? Look at that. That's crazy. That's her. She's a sweet little lady. She's a pretty little girl, man. She's all running around. She's a pretty little thing. I wonder why that won't zoom in right there. Huh? That's crazy. Anyway, 1 Peter chapter 4. Let's do this. Oh man. And I took the skin off of like 3 of my fingers yesterday, and whew, let me tell you what. Whew, man. Them things hurt. All right. Let's try to get to it. Beloved, written to the church. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you are sharing in the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exaltation. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and God rests on you. Make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be put to shame, but is to glorify God in this name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the house of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? Therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God must entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing good. That's our text. So, going back to verse 12, I'm sorry. Beloved, anytime you see this, beloved, like we're going to get into in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9. Now, I've already went over this in some of my free will teachings, but I know we're going to get into it again because that book is coming up next. So, beloved, it's written to believers. I've kind of been over this a bunch, but like I say, the Bible's written for believers, not for unbelievers. Can unbelievers pick up the Bible and get saved? Yes, it's the Word of God. If they're called, they can. But the Bible mainly straightforwardly is written to those who have the Spirit of God, because you have to have the Spirit of God to discern what's in God's word. So, beloved, he's writing to believers, and I think people just get that out of line a lot. They feel like God just wrote the Bible to unbelievers, like it's their book, kind of like how churches are tailoring their services to unbelievers. A church service is not for unbelievers. It's cool if they're there, but a church service is for believers to come together and worship. That's what it's for. It's a worship service. You're there to worship God. People who are unbelievers aren't there to worship God. They may be, there's a myriad of reasons they could be there, but they're not already in a relationship with him, coming to worship him for all that he's done. It's not for them. And they should go. If people come into your church and they don't, unbelievers especially, and they don't feel uncomfortable, you're not doing something right. They should feel uncomfortable, because you're steeped in sin. You should feel very uncomfortable. You should feel very uncomfortable in your own home, not even just in a church. You should feel uncomfortable every second of every day if you're steeped in sin and you don't know Christ. But not to be surprised at the fiery trial that come up. So now Peter's going to get into this. Listen, man, when you're saved, your faith is going to be tested. Nobody tells y'all that stuff. There's not many people out there telling people, hey, listen, you can claim to have faith, but it's going to be tested to see what manner of faith that it is. It seems like people just become Christians and they think it's just going to be a walk in the park Kazansky. It ain't. This ain't Top Gun. It ain't. That's not how this works. There is going to be suffering. If you look at the lives, we really should be telling people this. Look, listen. When you go out and evangelize and you're teaching and preaching, if you want to be, you hear so many of these people today, I want to be like the apostles. The church today has lost their way, and we want to go back to when the apostles. You mean you want to go back to extreme suffering and people peeling your skin off and dragging you behind horses until dead and running you through with swords and hanging you upside down and sawing you in half while you're still alive, or peeling your skin off, it's called flaying, peeling your skin off while you're still alive, to which they had perfected it and could make you live up to 3 days while they're peeling your skin off. That's what you want to go back to as a Christian? No. That people say things all out the side of their mouth all the time. There are going to be fiery trials that come upon you. When we tell people, we should tell people the whole story instead of. The good news is great. The gospel's great, and nobody's getting saved without that. That is the power of God unto salvation. I'm not taking anything away from that, but add to that couple of things. It's like Jesus said, right? No man builds a house without sitting down first and considering what it's going to cost him to finish it. Analogy, you want an explanation of that? You need to sit down and really consider what you're doing when you say you want to bring Christ into your life. You really should sit down and consider what you're doing, because it's a heavy responsibility and it's heavy everywhere. But we should be telling people this is a starting gun. This is the start of a very long race, and a very difficult race, and you have to race this race every single day. You can take no days off. It's like, David Goggins and all these people that are running. Trust me, that man sleeps. In this battle, there ain't no sleep. This is a every second of your life battle, from now until the day you die. When you become a Christian, and you're going to get persecution from the world, persecution from your family, persecution from your friends, persecution here, persecution there. It's going to be everywhere. If you live, if you're If you're not, I really always hated it when people say, well, people in the West aren't experiencing persecution today. No, people aren't peeling our skin off. But I'm gonna tell you, if you if you believe scripture and you stand for what you believe, you can find persecution in a hurry. I mean, roll up to a Catholic church this Sunday and tell them that they're preaching a false gospel. You get persecution in a hurry. So it just depends on your level. It kind of like if you meet someone who's like, well, we don't experience persecution, you can tell they're really not doing much of a job for the Lord, because if you're out there doing a job for the Lord, you're going to be getting it. But there are persecutions that come because you claim the name of Christ, and then there is testing of faith that God does to you to test what manner of faith it is. He says, Peter says, don't be surprised at all these things that come upon you, like something were happening to you, like something bad's going on, or whatever it may be. I've been learning to count it all joy, as far as to when I have hard things to deal with, remembering that everything works together for the good to those that love God and who are the called according to his purpose. Now, people use that verse all the time as a cliche, but if you meditate on it and really use it in its proper way, no matter what happens, even things that you think are terrible are working together for your good. So if you can look at them in that light, then nothing really brings you down. You don't get upset when bad things happen. You understand that it's all just a puzzle piece in making the mosaic of your life. And if you can really harness that belief, it will carry you a long way. But do not be surprised at the fiery trials that come upon you. There's going to be trials that are coming upon you to test you, notice he says fiery trials, kind of like when you melt down. That's how you make metal purer, if you will. Melt it down, take all the impurities out of it, and whatever you're left with is pure material, raw material. And you can't do that without fire. You can't cook the material out to get the raw material without the heat and the fire. Kind of like water. When you're purifying water, you get dirty water, you want to purify it, boil it, and it will cook out everything that's impure in it, and then it will be clean and you can drink it. It's the same way in this passage. Is what he's saying is the fire is what refines and reveals and burns away these type of sins or things in your life that God needs to get rid of. Is a fiery trial to come upon you, and it's to test your faith, to see what manner of faith it is, to see where you stand, to see where you need to grow. At times, when you're growing in faith, you may fail at one point here, but the next time you get tried by that, you'll pass. And sometimes you'll pass them on the first time, sometimes you won't. A lot of times you won't. It's just the way it goes, and we're constantly overcoming. But he says, don't act like something strange is happening to you, like the universe has just thrown me a curveball. No, God threw you a curveball, and it's to test your faith. Make sure you stay on that. But to the degree that you are sharing in the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. So sharing in the sufferings of Christ is one of the things we're called to do. And suffering doesn't go over well with many people. They don't want suffering, they want comfort. The Christian life is a life of suffering. And it's not that God's just up there cracking whips and wanting you to just have the worst time ever and make it a harder life as he possibly can on you. None of that, none of those things. But do realize that the suffering of Christ, the ultimate suffering of Christ, is death, burial, and resurrection. But in the death, in the gospel, but in the death part of it, he brought about the greatest good the world has ever seen through the ministry of evil. He did not conquer in spite of the darkness of the ministry of evil. He conquered through it. So when you're going through these dark times and dark trials, it will bring out on the other side, the sufferings of Christ will bring out on the other side a greater good. And we are all of us who are his people are going through this suffering. It's one of the comforts that the Bible calls you to, knowing that other people are suffering the same as you're suffering for the same reasons you're suffering for Christ. And by the way, when you have verses like Philippians 4:13 that everybody always uses out of context, you can do anything with a verse out of context. That particular passage is about suffering. Paul being cold and hungry and non-fed, and then he at times he has food and he's warm and he has a place to sleep. Then at times he has no place to sleep. He's cold, wet, with nothing to eat, and he knows how to be. He says, "I know how to be content in both situations. I can be content if I have nothing, and I can be content if I have a lot." I have learned to be content in both situations. I can do all things through Christ. That's what he's saying. I can suffer and I can abound. I know how to, and he uses that language. I know how to abound and I know how to be made low. I know how to be brought low and I know how to abound. I know how to be without clothes and I know how to have them. I know how to be without food and I know how to have it. And I can be content. It doesn't really matter to me in each situation, because I can do all things through Christ, because all of the strength that I draw is from him. That's the context of that verse. It's about the suffering and the hard times and the fiery trials and the everything else. It's like Ananias. God said to Ananias when he's first meeting Paul, not God meeting Paul, but Ananias when he's blinded on the road to Damascus. And God tells him, he's going to suffer for my name. I'm going to show him how much he will suffer for my name's sake. He's going to suffer. And Paul suffered probably more than anybody that we have record of. I mean, he went through the ringer, not just one time, many times, being beaten 5 times, 39, 40 lashes minus 1, 39 lashes, beaten with rods. He's been whipped. He's shipwrecked. He's been stoned. I mean, he wasn't smoking. He took a beating and then was beheaded at the end of it. So he spent a good bit of time in jail and prison, cold, hungry. No, those particular passages, like in Philippians, he's speaking about is being in jail and being out of jail and having food and having this, and then being imprisoned for Christ and being mistreated, being beaten. Acts chapter 16, he's in jail and they beat the mess out of him. Back's probably bleeding, and if you notice, he said, I got beat 5 times by the Jews, 40 lashes minus 1. In Acts chapter 16, 15 and 16, he didn't get beat by Jews, he got beat by Romans. So that was another beating that he took. So that's 6 beatings that we have record of that Paul took specifically. And by the way, just on a side note, if you have never seen one of these things, these type beatings, Muslims still do them today. And you can go online on Google or whatever you want and look up videos of these beatings and pictures of people with these beatings, and they're holding them down, laid them out on a bench, and they're holding them down and they're beating their backs with rods. And I mean, I've seen pictures of people who are in the middle of getting the beating and their back is as black as my shirt already, and they're still being beaten. I mean, can you imagine what that thing's going to look like 2-3 days from now? That thing, mangled. Your back would hurt so bad, man. 39 lashes, that's a lot. And 5 times he was beaten from them, and 1 time from the Romans. So 6 times this man had endured that type of beat. His back was probably mangled meat. Even when it was healed, it was probably just mangled up. So, as I said before, when people jump into this, I want to be. I've heard this, a good bit. Well, we want to be like the New Testament Christians because everybody in the church has gone so far, and no, yeah, I really don't think you don't know what you're asking for, because they suffered an immense amount, and yes, we should be suffering the same amount. That suffering is coming, but You got to read the whole thing before you start saying stuff like that. Keep on rejoicing now. If you're sharing in the sufferings of Christ, what he wants you to do is jump up and down and rejoice. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes. I've had times where I was witnessing to people who were really close to me who weren't saved, and they were jumping on me together, 2 or 3 people at a time. You know, if you're witnessing at your job site, people that you're working with, and there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many people around, and you're the only Christian there, and you're trying to explain the Lord to them, and they're coming up with all these, really a lot of them are blasphemous. They don't realize it. They're doing it in ignorance and in unbelief. So, you tread lightly with them, but they're almost blaspheming God's name. They're making fun of you. They're laughing, all this stuff, and sometimes it's hard to not get aggravated about it and hurt, but not hurt like you hurt my feelings. It's more of a hurt like I wish you would just get it. It's kind of like the same hurt of like one of your best friends getting cancer and refusing treatment. And you're just watching them wilt away every day, and it is that way because with unbelievers, you just watch them struggle through life so hard. They have no hope, no direction, no nothing, and they're going through all just hard time after hard time, back to back to back, and they won't submit. You're just watching them suffer, and it's painful. So keep on rejoicing whenever you suffer for Christ. Thank him. And that'd probably be, now that I think about it, I'd probably be a pretty good witness. Like if people were picking on you and you started like, yeah, getting all happy, and they're like, what are you all excited about? And it's like, brother, I'm suffering for Christ. And you're just keep stacking them blessings, brother. Keep on, just keep stacking them. Cause he says, and he says, so that also at the revelation of his glory, that's his second coming, you may rejoice with exultation. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed. See there? That's what I mean. Like you're just, when people are picking on you and insulting you for the name of Christ, because here's the thing. When you take Christ's name upon yourself, they're not throwing stones at you. They're throwing them at him. It's not you that they don't like, and that they're not. It's him that they're having a problem with. And I tell them that it's not me you got a problem with. I'm not telling you my standard because people get all upset with you like, well, you're Mr. Righteous. No, brother. I'm not perfect. I'm not telling you this is not my standard. This is not a man's standard. This is God's standard. I don't have to meet the standard perfectly to tell you what the standard is. You get what I mean? If I make mistakes too, in whatever you do, it's like saying I'm a master mechanic. Let's say I'm a master mechanic, but every now and then I make a mistake. I'm learning still too. They're coming out with all these new vehicles with all this new stuff all over it. You know what I mean? And sometimes I make a mistake too. I'm a human being. But it's almost like saying, because I make mistakes, I can never teach anybody mechanics. Even though I'm a master mechanic, I can never teach someone who's green, who doesn't know anything about mechanics. I can't teach them because yesterday I made a mistake. That makes no sense whatsoever. Just because you can't hold the standard 100% of the time, all of the time, you can't be perfect, means that you can't then tell somebody what the standard is. And what I mean by that is, just because I don't keep God's law perfectly every single time, every single day, does it not mean that I can't tell you what God's standard is. Of course I can. I'm telling you the standard. Now, you are blessed. It's one of the things in Scripture where it specifically names instances or things that you can do to receive a blessing, to get blessed. One of the things that comes to mind is reading the book of Revelation. He who reads the words of this book and keeps the things which are written therein are blessed. You get blessed just for reading it. And here you're blessed, and the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. when you are suffering and taking persecution for the name of Christ, the Spirit of God and the Spirit of glory, and God and the Spirit of God rests on you. That's not two different spirits. It's just the Spirit of glory and the Spirit of God rest upon you. Make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer, thief, evildoer, or troublesome meddler. It goes back to the verses where God is speaking and he says, if you suffer for doing wrong, and you're only receiving justice, you're only receiving what you earned from your bad deed. But if you suffer for doing what is right, this is commendable before God. This is the same mind that Christ had, the same example that Christ set. He did what was right every single time, but yet suffered for it every single time. It wasn't just that Christ suffered on the cross. He suffered throughout his entire life. And people were constantly making fun of him. You get, I can't remember, I always forget this verse, but it's in Psalms where he says I was the song of the drunkard, which is a messianic psalm, and it's talking about Jesus as he's growing up being picked on for by the drunkards of the city. They made songs about him, and you can kind of get a glimpse of this when he's talking to the Pharisees in Matthew 23, and the Pharisees say to him, "We be not born of fornication. We know who our father is." It might be in John 8, but anyway, he's we be not born of fornication. We know who our father is. People kind of miss that. That's a direct jab that Jesus was born of whoredom, because people knew that Joseph wasn't his real father, and they figured Mary had gone out and had relations with some man. I believe in history the story is that she had relations with a Roman soldier, but anyhow, but nobody knew who his dad was, and that's one of the Pharisees throwing a dig at him. We know we're not born of fornication. We know who our father is. They were saying that Jesus was born of fornication, and so he's suffering through his entire life growing up. I mean, the very first sermon he preached in Luke 4, if you pay attention to that sermon, it's in his hometown. He's in Nazareth, where he grew up, where his family and all of his friends and neighbors and everybody that knew him growing up are there in the synagogue, and he's there and he starts teaching, and they're ready to throw him off of a cliff. I mean, even his own family, he preached one sermon and they're trying to kill him. But if you suffer for doing what is wrong, you're only suffering for the wrath that you incurred. You get no credit for doing 20 years in prison when you killed somebody. But if you didn't kill somebody and you're suffering for the name of Christ, and somebody puts you in jail for 20 years because they made the Bible illegal or what have you, and you're standing on that word, these things are commendable before God. If you suffer as an evildoer, not commendable. So he says, make sure that you're not suffering for those reasons. In comparison, you need to be suffering for Christ. And those are only good reasons that you're suffering for. You're not suffering for none of this bad stuff, because people in here are, going through suffering for doing evil things and then putting that on Christ. Well, I'm just suffering for, the Lord here. I'm being tested. No, you're suffering for doing evil, and you're not supposed to do that. So don't be caught suffering for doing evil. Suffer for what is right. This is what he's getting at. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, and this is one of the only times the word Christian is used in the entire Bible. It wasn't a big term. We use it. It means little Christ, and we should be acting that way. We don't, but we should be. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be put to shame, but is to glory God in this name. So if you're, again, same kind of referencing, if you're suffering for Christ, you should be rejoicing. You should be happy that you are worthy to bear that. So you're not worthy as far as in yourself, but God has seen you worthy enough to suffer for his name and put you into that. And it teaches you things as well. I keep saying, you learn from suffering. You don't learn from from pleasure. You learn from the pain of making mistakes and going through suffering. That's how you learn not to do those things again. And you begin to learn and start stacking some wins. For verse 17, for it is time for judgment to begin with the house of God. Whether you know that or not, it's one reason I'm very careful with this. When you see a ton of evil going on in the world and you're like, boy, I'm ready for God to come down and just lay some punishment down, straighten this stuff out. Just remember, keep in the back of your mind that judgment begins with us. Judgment begins in the house of God. And as I believe eschatology, you have, if you read Revelation, you read your eschatology, you read Thessalonians and other places, especially in Revelation where it talks about two deaths. There are two deaths. You can either live once and die twice, or die once and live twice. And what they mean by that is there is a resurrection for believers, and then there's a separate resurrection for unbelievers. The resurrection of the dead, Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20. There's not revelations. It's just one revelation. So you have a revelation of the living. A resurrection of the living, and then a resurrection of the dead. And right here he's saying the judgment begins with the house of God. We will be judged before they will. Now, we don't have to pay for our sins. Jesus has already paid for that, but you do have to stand at the bema seat of Christ and answer for the things which you've done in the flesh, good or bad. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 deals with that. If you read that passage, just be careful and notice that it's the person's work that's being tried, not the person himself. A man's work shall be tried by fire. If a man's work is burned up, he himself will be saved, but one is barely escaping the flames. So it tells you he himself will be saved, but all of his works will be burned up. It's the works of the man that are being tried in that passage, not the man himself. The mercy seat, if you're familiar with your Old Testament, you had the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is just the base. It had a lid, and that lid is not the ark. That's a separate piece. It's called the mercy seat, right? Where they sprinkled the blood. That mercy seat is where Christ sits on the it's called the bema seat. A mercy seat, same thing. And he will judge from that seat. All of us believers will have to meet before that seat. And if you get these two kind of mixed up in your head, this will help you. At least it helped me. Maybe it'll help you. There's two types of judges on the earth, right? That we can look at and get a picture of. You have a judge that judges in a courthouse, hands out sentencing. That's the judgment of unbelievers. He's handing out sentences for whatever works they did. Then you have a judge, let's say, at a cook-off, who's not handing out punishment. He's handing out rewards only. He puts one person at number one. Yours was the best. You got number two. You got number three. You got number four. First place, here's your trophy. Second place, here's your trophy. And that's kind of the illustration. You got one judge that's just handing out rewards. Hey, your chili was the best. You know, number one, the work you did survived, if you will. And then you have the judgment in a courtroom where it's just a criminal coming in, judgment, criminal coming in, judgment, criminal coming in, judgment. Two different types of judges. Same way, Christ will be judging the house of God, but on the bema seat, handing out rewards. You may lose reward or inheritance, but you don't lose your sonship. You're still a son of God. Not only begotten son. I don't have time to go into all that, but son by adoption. And that's something you want to dig heavily into, because Muslims will say, they have this little saying, God has sons by the tons. You just need to make sure that there's only one begotten son. Not if you listen to Paula White, which is one of Trump's advisors, when he was in office. Spiritual advisors, a woman that says that Jesus Christ was not the only begotten son of God. I guess she never read John 3:16. But You're a son by adoption. But a criminal, not a son, he's catching judgment, 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 which is God's justice. He earned that judgment. For judgment begins at the house of God, and if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God, not believe the gospel of God? That is, you are saved by your belief. But notice he's saying they don't obey the gospel of God. Belief is part of the obeying, but also the keeping the commandments. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Those type of things. Bear fruit in your life. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey? What's going to be the outcome? God already told you the outcome: wrath, indignation, fierce anger, judgment, and punishment. That's the outcome. And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? Now, people use this verse a lot, misuse this verse a lot. It's hard for a righteous person to be saved. Well, actually, it's impossible. There's a couple of things here. There are no righteous people. That's number one. But with man, it is impossible to be saved. With God, all things are possible. And it is very, very difficult to get saved because you can't get it on your own strength. It has to come from Him. So yeah, it's very difficult for you to get saved. It's impossible. No man can come to me unless God, the Father which has sent me, draws him. But if it's that way for the righteous, what will be of the godless man and the sinner? What's going to be their eternal? And by the way, when we should. I've never done this, but if you're a type of Christian that's telling people they can go to hell, or they're going to hell, or this sort of thing, hell's only a temporary. There's something coming after that called the lake of fire. You read in Revelation chapter 20, where death and hell are cast into the lake of fire. The lake of hell, it seems, has nothing on the lake of fire. You always tell people, well, if you die without Christ, you die and go to hell. Yeah, but you're going to go to the lake of fire. Every liar will have his part in the lake of fire that burns with fire and brimstone. That sounds much worse, much worse. That's going to be there, and the smoke of their torment will rise up forever. Revelation, you can read about that. It's not good. Let's just put it that way. It's not good. Therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God must entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing good. This is one of the hard ones to me. Just for this, therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God. Just remember this: if you are suffering, it's because of the will of God, and you can rejoice in that. That you're suffering because it's His will that you're suffering, and if you are suffering, it is His will that you're suffering. Don't always be so quick to try to pray those things away, because it's testing your faith, producing perseverance. There's a lot of it is the will of God for your life. There's a lot of scripture that are telling you to share in the sufferings, all of these things. And it seems as soon as some suffering comes, is there anything we need prayer for tonight? Oh, the suffering is coming. Suffering's on me. I'm having a hard time. We try to pray it away immediately. Just next time you get into some suffering, don't try to pray it away immediately. Find out what you need to learn through the suffering. Find out the reason why God is putting you through this suffering. Ask God to reveal it to you. Open your eyes to whatever's going on. Usually on the backside, you find out why you were suffering a little ways down the road. It comes. He'll reveal it to you in time. You won't get it while you're going through it, for sure. Takes time, and it'll come around, and one day it'll click, and you'll be like, that's what that was for. It teaches you humility, patience, long suffering, love, enduring, all of those things. Suffering teaches you all of that stuff. And one of my favorite words, it's only used in the King James Bible about God, says that he's, well, no, it's in the NASB as well, and some other ones. Long suffering. It's not used as much, but in the King James, pretty prevalent. That God is long suffering, meaning that he suffers a long time in order to obtain the goal that he has set. He is willing to suffer with you long through our stupidity and ignorance and hardness of heart and all of those things to bring us to Christ. Every day he's suffering with us, committing these sins and grieving him and all of these things in order to make us more like his son and advance us in his kingdom more towards the image of Christ. And he does that through suffering. So don't pray that thing away as soon as it comes. Realize that it's the will of God for your life, that it's producing perseverance, it's testing your faith, it's strengthening your faith, showing you, revealing to you what kind of faith you have, because everybody thinks they have faith to move mountains, but it's not until you go through some real hard suffering that you find out where you stand with faith. And that's across all measures. Now, according to the will of God, must entrust their souls to a faithful creator. What if the suffering you're going through, this is where it gets hard for me. What if the suffering that God has planned for your life is being put into a concentration camp and killed for the name of Christ? That's and you have to entrust yourself to him, knowing that he is working out something good. Instead of picking up arms and fighting back and living as long as you possibly can and killing as many people as you can take out and all of this stuff that we automatically go to whenever we think about, suffering or somebody trying to put us into some type of especially Americans, put us into some type of prison camps and this and that. And we're like, nope, we're going to fight till the death. I mean, we have the Gadsden flag, don't tread on me, and things like that. It has a snake that's coiled up. I always wondered about that, why they picked that symbol, a snake coiled, ready to strike. And it's kind of like, you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. But if you wanna try to tread on me, you better be ready for me to strike immediately at any second. And like snakes are, they're lying in wait, sitting. They're waiting for something to go down. They're not just hoping something's gonna, not gonna go down. They're waiting for it to happen, and they're initiating it. They're in the fight, and they're ready to go. And they will, if you mess around, they'll bite you and pump as much venom in as they can. You get what I mean? That's why you have it. Therefore, those who suffer according to the will of God must entrust their souls to a faithful Creator, knowing that all things are working together for good, even if you had to. That's a battle I fight. How far do you take it? If somebody came to your house and tried to march your family off into a concentration camp, and you got guns to defend yourself, you live in this country. What do you do? Do you realize if they're persecuting you specifically, because that's kind of what the Holocaust was, being God's people? What do you do? Entrust yourself to the Creator and just let it roll, or do you fight it out? Those are some of the things I struggle with, but that's just me being transparent. Well, we finished up, man. Dude, I apologize. We haven't really slept all week. I mean, I'm looking at this camera. I look pretty tired, which is odd for me, but I'm a human being too. I hate to admit sometimes, but whew, I get tired too every now and then. It takes about a week or two of no sleep, and then I start getting worn down. But it's getting there. We're in it. I appreciate y'all very much. Next class, Perseverance of the Saints, and then back to 1 Peter 5. We'll probably do all of chapter 5 at once. It's not too bad. 14 verses, and then we'll be moving to 2 Peter. I love y'all very much. Thank you for tuning in and joining me, and always being here. Subscribe to the channel, like the videos, share the videos, and I wanted to do something. So if you watch my channel and you watch these videos, you have the ability to comment afterwards. If there's anything I've said, any question you have, anything, I want to start doing this where you can comment on the channel, on the videos. I'll see what's going on and I can answer. Leave your question. You don't even have to leave your name. Leave a question if you have a question, and I'll start doing videos just to, short ones just to answer those questions and go over those things to clarify some of the things that I talk about. If you have any of those questions, and help me grow the channel, and I appreciate y'all very much. Remember, from tonight's teaching, suffering is what you've been called to do. I'll give you a verse to go with it. It is not only been given unto you to believe on Christ, but also to suffer for him. It's been granted to you to believe on him, not only, but to suffer for him. Philippians 1:29. Suffering is part of this. If you're not doing any suffering, figure out why. You should be suffering either for your witness for Christ, the stand you're taking for Christ, because definitely in a world today, it's not popular at all, period, none whatsoever. And that you can be suffering, going through various trials and temptations that have come upon you to test your faith, to see what type of manner it is, which is producing in you a greater weight of glory, perseverance, all of those things, love, patience, joy, peace, kindness, gentleness, self-control. All of those things you are being forced into those positions to teach you one of those aspects to grow you in Christ as a believer. So take that suffering and use it and figure out what it's for, why it's there, and bring about good. He'll bring about the good with it, but allow him to. Don't just pray it away immediately. Sit in it a minute. Figure out why it's there. I love y'all. Got a yawning. I love y'all very much. I appreciate you again. And I'll leave that other video up just because we're going through. I won't delete it, but I'll leave it up. But I'll see y'all Sunday night, Lord willing, if I'm still here and my daughter manages to sleep. And then we'll keep cranking away. And if you do have a request for a teaching, topical teaching, or a book itself, leave that comment as well, and I'll get to it, and I'll take your stuff, and we can go through it. If you have any issues that you've heard at your church or you're dealing with, or whatever else, you got any type of questions, leave them on the channel. Don't be shy. Leave them up there so we can get to them, because the questions you may ask or the things that you may have to say will help somebody else. So don't be shy in getting it, because God always uses all of us, not just me, but all of us as a group, as a collective, to sharpen and grow one another. So love y'all again. I'll see y'all. Get some rest. It's late.